repairs, new and used bikes, e-bikes from Aventon, Velotrick, Trek and Electra, and cycling accessories. More at davesbikeshop.com and 707-462-3230.
Good morning, and welcome to the F5M Mendocino Community Hour. I'm your host, Townley Saye. This is your monthly connection to the people and programs building a stronger future for our youngest children and their families here in Mendocino County. Before we begin today's important conversation, we want to take a moment to honor the visionary who made all of our work possible, the recently passed actor, director, and relentless advocate, Rob Reiner. It was Rob Reiner's groundbreaking advocacy that led California voters to pass Proposition 10 in 1998. That legislation created the funding structure, the tobacco tax, that established First Five commissions in all 58 counties, including our own right here in Mendocino. It funds everything from early literacy, parent education, perinatal supports, and to the very supports we'll be discussing today. The First Five Association of California recently released this statement, which we'd like to share in full. Rob Reiner was a visionary and progressive thought leader whose legacy transformed California's early childhood landscape. He led the groundbreaking Proposition 10 campaign that created California's First Five network, defended it against political opposition, and even advanced our mission by championing universal preschool, a measure that laid the foundation for today's traditional kindergarten. Thanks to his leadership, more than 1 million children and families benefit each year from access to early learning, healthcare, and family supports. Mr. Reiner understood that the first 5 years are foundational and that true support for children requires real investment. We honor his legacy by sustaining and strengthening the early childhood system he helped build and by continuing the work to ensure every child in California has an opportunity to thrive. Mr. Reiner's vision lives on as First Five's shared commitment, and that's from Avo Magdason, the Executive Director for First Five Association of California. We too carry that legacy forward. At First Five Mendocino exists because we believe, as Rob Reiner did, that these investments we make in the first 5 years of a child's life last a lifetime. This time on the air with you today is dedicated to explore all of the investments that First Five Mendocino invest in. You can learn more at those at our website, First Five, it's spell out first, F-I-R-S-T, the number 5, Mendocino.org. They include health and wellness, early learning and care, parent education and support, trauma-informed care, and community advocacy. Today, under that pillar of trauma-informed care, we're tackling a difficult but universal subject, grief. To help us understand and navigate that, I've asked our Community Education Manager, Megan Carson, to join me in co-hosting today's episode, as well as the expertise of Dr. MaryCatherine McDonald, known as MC. She's been investing in our community for a while and coming and speaking on this. Megan, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah. So I'm the Community Education Manager at First Five Mendocino, and my job is to help provide professional development and trainings for professionals in Mendocino County so that they're well informed in best practices for helping children and families. And to introduce MC McDonald, she's a research professor who specializes in the psychology of trauma, stress, and resilience. She's been researching, lecturing, and publishing on the neuroscience, psychology, and lived experience of trauma and stress for over a decade. She's passionate about destigmatizing trauma, stress, and mental health issues and reframing our understanding of trauma. She's the author of multiple books, 2 of which we've had her speak extensively on here in Mendocino County. Unbroken, The Trauma Response is Never Wrong, and The Joy Reset, 6 Ways Trauma Steals Happiness and How to Win It Back. So we're super excited to have her joining us today on the radio show. Welcome, MC, to Mendocino County. You're kind of an honorary member of Mendocino County at this point.
Exactly. I always joke that, like, at some point I'm just going to have to move up there.
Yes.
Hi, Townley. Hi, Megan. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here to talk to you about this. And again, so sorry for the loss of Rob and Michelle. And what a beautiful story about the origin of First Five.
Yeah, it's been it's been kind of surprising to a lot of people who've learned about his passing and how he was so intricate in our work that we do here, and how he established the funding structure that supports everything. I mean, he's brought millions of dollars into our county to support early learning and care in children and families for the last 25 plus years. So it's definitely felt. But there's a lot of things in our community that are going on. And, even before Rob and Michelle's passing, we had thought about, the holidays and just the winding down of, the closing of one year and the introduction of another year. This time of year in general can just percolate a lot of feelings around grief and loss. And so even before that, when we were planning the show, we really wanted to have you on. And so I'm so happy to have you here. I do want to just warn our listeners that, just a little bit of a content warning. We will be discussing some difficult topics that may be hard to listen to. We won't be sharing personal stories, but just overarching themes on how grief and trauma and loss kind of show up in our lives, especially this time of year. So along with that, we just also be sharing some tools for healthy processing. And that's what I really just want to lean on, MC, because you've developed some really key, intricate tools on how to kind of help us integrate the things and the things that come up around grief and loss. So maybe could you
absolutely.
Yeah, I think maybe it would be awesome if you could just coordinate our listeners into your working definition of grief and maybe some of the stages and how we can refer to those loosely throughout the show.
For sure. I think there's so much hope in grief. I want to say that kind of off the bat because I think sometimes this is one of the things that, of course, we want to turn away from, right? Like grief is not something that we want to dive into. Usually we're plunged into it against our will. And so it can be a really tricky topic, but there's also a lot of depth and beauty in it, in the process, in the way that we can come together in grief. And so I just want to say that kind of off the bat. And I love that you asked the question about, what is the definition of grief? Because we always think we know what we're talking about, right? Grief, everyone knows what that is, right?
Right.
But I think when we get to the definition, it can be really normalizing and helpful because grief is a very overwhelming experience. And so the definition that I use is that grief is the natural, emotional, and cognitive processing of reacting to a loss.
I love that.
Right?
You repeat that, please. I love that.
Grief is a natural, emotional, and cognitive processing of reacting to a loss. It's a little bit clunky, but the things I want to kind of point out there are grief is natural. It is something that, interestingly, I think we live in a grief-phobic culture. We don't talk about grief.
100%,
we don't. We kind of box it in, and it's like, okay, you get 2 or 3 days of bereavement, and then you're expected to just come back to a normal situation. And that's only if the grief is in your immediate family, right? So if you're dealing with a grief that is a little bit more distant and you don't get any bereavement leave.
Right.
And when people talk about it, it's people want you to stop and whatever. So I think it's really important to understand that grief is something that we will, literally every single one of us will and have experienced. And it's natural. It's a completely natural process. Also, it's emotional and cognitive. And the reason I think that's hopeful is because I think because grief is so overwhelming and because we don't really talk about it that much, we think it's just this emotional roller coaster that we're going to be on and have no say over.
Right.
And to an extent it is, right? You do get hit by waves and there is this natural movement of it, but there's also a cognitive aspect, which means that we can go in and do a lot of things in grief that can help us integrate the loss and connect with other people and process the things that are going on. So it's not all helpless.
Right.
And then just the last piece of that is the process piece. It has a beginning, middle, and an end, even though the end is sort of eternal in a way. If you're in an acute grief state, it's not going to stay like that forever. There is a natural movement to the process of grief.
Absolutely, definitely. And, given that definition, we normally associate grief with death. But I know that in the workshops that you've been doing for our community, there's lots of different, kind of definitions, or there's different areas of grief. Can you expand on a little bit of that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have grief over any kind of loss. And so that can be, of course, a death. That could also be a loss of identity. That could be a loss of a job or career path. People, a lot of the time, have a lot of grief when they have a huge transition in their life, even if they really wanted it. So like the transition to parenthood, for example, can be one that is incredibly joyful and one that you wanted, but also you have to sort of leave behind a former identity because everything is changing.
Yeah.
So there can be grief there, grief at the loss of a relationship, right, divorce or a breakup, and also grief at sort of a larger, more kind of difficult to define thing, right? I think a lot of people right now are feeling a lot of grief about what they thought that our country was before this year, and things like that. So, and there are a lot of different types of. Anytime you have any kind of loss or transition or change, you can encounter grief.
And I think that's a very important distinction to make between, the systemic thing that we respond to as far as with grief is. Like you mentioned it, you only get like this many days to kind of like grieve. And it's usually just related to like, attendance to a funeral or attendance to a wake or what have you. So, systemically, we look at it as a very limiting kind of experience. I think Megan will talk about this a little bit more, but we all have, I feel like in Mendocino County, we have a few unique challenges with our rural isolation, and then our situation with our, kind of, thankfully, we haven't had any and recently, but wildfires, like the series of wildfires. I know there was a collective impact with the pandemic, and then the restructuring and the rebuilding past that pandemic, kind of figuring out what resources were lost during that time and how do we restore them. As well as, I always want to call out the loss of indigenous communities and the historical trauma that kind of still sits and rests in our community as well. So I think that those are some unique challenges that we kind of are uncomfortable about talking about too.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And I think like, especially when those things are intergenerational, as you mentioned just now, like how do you grieve something that, a previous generation was grappling with? Like if we can't grieve the things that we are losing right now, how do we do that? And I think there's a ton of hope there, but I think, it is very overwhelming. And that's why I think a lot of education around grief is so important, because if we learn this stuff in the moments when we're not in an acute grief moment, phase, then we'll have the tools when we need them, both for ourselves and just the community at large.
And that's really what we've been doing in Mendocino County, right, Megan? Like with that preventative work.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciated what you just said, MC, about like the cognitive aspect of grief, that we, even if we understand it and we're ready for it and we understand our own response to it, big emotions can still come up, on anniversaries or other events that, kind of trigger a past experience or wound. And I think it's really easy then to get sucked into the grief that then can cause like shame and embarrassment or like, what's wrong with me? I thought I was healed from this. So I was hoping you might be able to speak a little bit to that, about like the aspect of, how do we put into practice, or how do we strengthen maybe our ability to like get curious with what's coming up, or I don't know, any ideas around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a lot. There's this quote by Dr. Lois Tonkin. She says, "People think that grief slowly gets smaller with time. In reality, grief stays the same size, but slowly life begins to grow bigger around it." And this has been depicted in images and in different ways. So sometimes you'll see like a box, a series of boxes, and like the box is getting bigger. The grief isn't getting smaller. The box is getting bigger. And I think it's important to understand that sometimes I like to think about grief as sort of akin to like having an infant. Right? When you have a new child, for those first little bits of time, that child, that grief takes up all of your energy and all of your time. And as the child grows, you get more time to yourself and more space, and the child is more independent, and it's still there. It always needs you, right? Even if it's 25 or 38 or 50, right? but your life grew bigger around the child. And so I think when we think about grief that way, that can sort of mitigate the fact that, like, it is going to always be in your life. I think we have this idea, like, if I can get the grief checklist and I can go through the stages in the right order and as quickly as possible, then I just never have to think about it again. But that's just not how it works. It's something that's going to stay with you forever. And that is not a damning thing. It is a beautiful thing. It means the relationship that you have with the person or the thing that you've lost always remains.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love
and
that.
So I actually have a tool around that, which I can go over really quickly if that works.
That would be lovely,
great.
yes.
So I think, there's two kind of, you can talk about grief in a lot of different ways. And one of the ways that people like to kind of draw a distinction between two types of grief is that you have active grief and you have passive grief. And passive grief is that grief that is that emotional, just sort of hits you like a wave, right? These are the aspects of grief that sort of happen to you without choice. So like I always talk about how that's the moment when you're in like the department store and, your wedding song comes on and you've just signed divorce papers that morning, right? And so that's passive grief. That just kind of hits you. Active grief is the conscious choice and actions that you can take in response to the loss. So that involves intentionally engaging with the grieving process, which helps you integrate the loss and process it. And so this really simple tool, this is actually from Unbroken, is called What Remains. And the idea is that, your grief is going to tell you what you've lost forever. You know what you've lost.
Right.
But I think it's really helpful to take a moment and think about what remains.
Yes. Yeah.
And I know that feels ridiculous in the moment, and you're going to say, like, nothing remains. The person is gone, or the thing is gone, or the relationship is gone. But to take a few minutes and think about, like, what is left? What did that person or that circumstance teach you that you get to keep? And maybe, like in the case of a loss of a loved one, maybe it's their sense of humor or their sense of wonder.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Or the work ethic that they instilled in you. And so if you sit down for a minute and make a list of what remains, then you're telling your nervous system, I have a say in grief, I have agency in grief, and this is not all about this loss. There are a lot of things that I get to keep.
Yeah.
That's just a super simple kind of narrative journaling tool that you can use at any time.
No, I love that. And that really kind of aligns with another model we do, and I think you're a little bit familiar with it, with the community resiliency model. Just ask what else is true, right? Same concept of what remains, what else is true, and to really, kind of journal about that stuff. I love that, or bring it up conversationally. I think it's a great way to also, when you're with somebody, sitting, sharing space with a grieving person, to just say, asking what else remains about that person, or if they were here with you right now, what would they say or give advice for?
Well, and I think too, in light of our introduction, referring to the sudden passing of Rob Reiner, like what remains now of what has he left behind that still remains, the work that we can continue to do in his honor.
Absolutely.
Was his legacy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's so much. And I know just with my, and this is, again, we're talking, I think, particularly around death, but I think that, when we're recovering from the pandemic and then figuring out, like, what are some of the resources that still remain in our community and what can we continue to build on and what can we bring back into the community that might be beneficial, any resources or services and what have you. And we will share some resources, some local resources, for recovery groups and mental health crisis responses throughout the show as well. But I love that, when you talk about that participatory piece, and Megan, you brought up a great word. I like the word curious. When we're curious about grief, I'm wondering, MC, could you talk about, helping support young families and children? I mean, we're kind of grief avoidant, right? How can we start developing some of these tools maybe in early childhood or in early family building that kind of create this normalization for grief? So as a community, we can kind of lean on these tools.
Yeah, that's a great question. Here, I think it's great to talk about the 6 needs of the grieving, which I'll get to in a second. But I think one of the most important things is to validate the grief of the griever, even if it feels small to you.
Oh.
And I think
that's worth repeating. Can you repeat that, please, for even maybe any listeners who are just tuning in? Because I think that's really, really important.
I think the most important thing is validating the grief of the griever, even if it feels small to you.
Yes.
And a quite vivid example of this I remember from the pandemic was there was a New York Times article about how, there was a whole generation of people who were losing their milestones. They weren't having the prom. They weren't having graduation ceremonies and parties, all of these things that they had been sort of promised and had seen maybe older siblings and friends have and go through. They weren't having those. And there was a backlash after the article because a lot of people were saying, how could you be talking about the prom at a time like this? This is, people are dying, right?
Right.
And both are true, right? Both of those things were going on at the same time.
Yes.
Both of those griefs are valid. And the person who is grieving the loss of their milestones needs to be validated and witnessed and listened to as much as the person who's losing a loved one. And so I think when it comes to kids and people who are in earlier stages of their development, a lot of their losses don't feel like losses to us great big adults, right? We're dealing with losses of parents and family members and friends, and then, a kid comes to school and they've lost, a stuffed animal or something. You want to say, buck up. And I think a lot of the time we think that's in their best interest because we're looking down sort of the tunnel of what their life is going to look like and thinking, you're going to have a lot of losses. You have to get used to it. But I think being able to meet somebody where they are and really, witness their pain and grief and ask them about it shows them and models for them both what it's like to be witnessed and also how to integrate grief.
Totally. I love that. And it's such a small thing that you can do.
Yeah. And it can ask a lot of us sometimes. Sometimes it's frustrating. You don't want to necessarily sit down and listen to somebody especially if you're going through what feels like a really big grief. But I think if you can take a few minutes and meet the person where they are, then it makes a world of difference, both for them and just for the larger community. Because if we're all doing that, then we're kind of working against that grief-phobic culture that tells us we're not allowed to talk about it.
Well, and as we're talking about this, I'm thinking of our 0 to 5 age range. And, children in that age range, you can't really talk about grief with them, cerebrally.
Right.
And so what are
emotions?
So I had the question come up in my head. So what do you do with a 2 or 3 year old that's, struggling with some big emotions or some big life changes, or maybe they've been put into a situation like a foster care situation, how do and so I had the thought of maybe play but I was curious what you might say for how to work with children that are too young to really understand the complexities of grief.
But they're embodying it in their little bodies.
Yeah, but they're still feeling it and they're recognizing that something big is happening, and what you might do with that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think that's a huge conversation. We could talk about that for the rest of the time.
This is what happened. I knew this would happen.
One of the first things is to go to the sort of bodied response, right? So meet them. So if it's not a child who's at the stage where they could developmentally talk or even identify kind of what's going on, it's just sort of ripping through their bodies. I think meeting them in that body state and aiming at co-regulation is key, right? So maybe that means you're holding their hand or snuggling them up or making sure that they are tucked in and safe in the way that feels the best for them. And also I think, we have, as elders and adults and parents, we have this impulse, this beautiful natural impulse to want to make it stop. And I think the better thing is to normalize letting it roll, cry it out instead of don't cry, and then I think play is a great place to you can kind of get to see what they're thinking, what kinds of things are they drawing, what kinds of scenarios are they creating with their toys and games, and where is loss present there, and then engage with it if you can, right? So if there's a lot of drawings about death and blood and bodies and things like that, right? You can ask them about it. Or maybe a friend moved away, and so a lot of their scenarios with their toys are about, exiling one toy and then they can't play with that toy, and talking about like what that means, and even sharing little stories about when that's happened to you, I think helps bring them into community with it. But again, it depends on like the age and the capacity of the child and where they're at, and then also your relationship. But I think normalizing the emotion rather than trying to shut it down is probably the most important part from my perspective, because I think when we don't go to war with our emotions, it's a lot easier.
Absolutely.
What do you two think, though? You both have kids, and
I think that you bring up a really important conversation that I know that we don't talk enough about, is that co-regulation piece, right? And I think that, when we're talking about grief, it can feel like a very adult emotion, right? An adult experience. Only adults can cognitively wrap their heads around grief and loss. And so when you mention that co-regulation piece, I think it's good for our listeners to understand that, the reason we're talking about these kind of adult things is because children do go through them, and they depend on how you respond to them. So they can identify, am I okay? Right? And so I think bringing it back to, maybe just talking more about those stages of grief that you were going to mention, because I think adults listening that how they understand in their relationship between grief and loss is going to help them better co-regulate when they do have a little one in their life that might need that support.
Yeah, I think, yes, I love exactly what you said. I think that's so right. And I think, so there's the stages of grief from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, but then there's the 6 needs of the grieving. So we can talk about both.
Yes.
But I think the 6 needs of the grieving is maybe more what you were getting at. And so these come from David Kessler, who's a grief educator, spent his entire career studying grief, and creates workshops and certification programs and stuff. And he, in his research, has identified 6 things that all grievers need. And again, like to your point, this is true whether the griever is 2 or 92. The first is to have your pain witnessed. Grief involves pain, and that pain needs to be validated and witnessed. Again, like not solved, not fixed, but witnessed.
Well, and I think you were talking about, just get over it or move on, or that disregard for whatever pain being experienced. So witnessing, I think, is. Can you give us an example of witnessing? I mean, I think that I might just a little snippet of what does it mean to witness someone's pain?
Yeah, I mean, I think meeting them where they are, and to use the words that Megan brought up earlier, to get curious about it.
Yeah.
I think, what's your favorite story about them? Tell me what it feels like to today. How does the grief feel today? What are you noticing in your loss? Anything, and then let them answer however they want. And don't try to fix it. Just sort of sit in it. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I just think sometimes, we get so close to our work, right? So for new listeners, like, I don't know what it means to witness someone's pain. I don't know to sit with that. So I really want to be able to make this really tangible for listeners to be like, oh, this is something I can do. I can ask this question or whatever. So thank you for entertaining my question.
Sure, of course. I think it's so important. Yeah.
Wonderful. So what was this?
The second need is to express your feelings. So again, to your point of like letting the emotions kind of go, it's important that the griever is allowed to express their feelings. Here's how I feel today. I feel angry. Here's how I feel today. I feel desperate sadness. I want to cry. I want to lie on the floor and kick my feet and yell. Those things have to be expressed.
Perfect.
The third is to release the burden of guilt. And this might not come up in a 2-year-old griever, but in an adult griever, often we sort of attempt to take responsibility for too much, and that could be that we're responsible for the death or the loss, or we're responsible for all the things that we failed to do in the relationship. So that fight we got in 1985, I'm guilty about that. And I could have been a better caretaker. And that one time in the 2 years of caretaking, I got really irritated and I snapped at my mom, so to be able to kind of talk those things through and be able to contextualize them and let them go.
I love that.
The next one is to be free of old wounds. So one of the things that happens, this happens with trauma as well, as you both know, and I think anybody listening knows, when something painful happens, it tends to bring up other pains, right? So I think the best example of this is like when you stub your toe. You've been carrying around all this sadness and all this grief and all this frustration, and you stub your toe, which is a pretty minor thing, and then all of the pain and the emotion comes out, and you're swearing and crying and thinking about everything that's wrong with your life and the world and all of that. And so when trauma and grief bring up old wounds, to be able to kind of process them and then let them go. And then the last two I think are really beautiful, to integrate the pain and the love. Our brains have a hard time with contradictory things, and so we think if there's pain, there can't be anything else. If there's bad, there can't be anything else. So to kind of gently learn that there is still love in grief, there is still joy in these dark moments. And then the last one, which is connected, is to find meaning after loss, right? So to the example about Rob Reiner, what is the legacy and how can you carry that forward in honor of that person, and feel like you are doing justice to their life.
Yeah, I love that. 6 things all grievers need. Is that what that song was?
Yes, the 6 needs of the grieving.
6 needs of the grieving. Thank you. So for our listeners who are just tuning in, this is the First 5 Mendocino Community Hour, and we have our guest speaker, Dr. MaryCatherine McDonald, who's talking to us about grief and loss and giving us some really great tools. So thank you so much. I love these, and I love how simple they are, because I think that we also want to make things more complicated sometimes, even when we're going through complicated emotions. Right? And so there's, I think that there's some contextual, just some validation and just saying, it doesn't have to be a complex solution for a complex emotion. It can be something really simple as like witnessing or, moving on to expressing your feelings, just, having that simple little thing, and it be so necessary for moving through the grief. I having experienced significant traumas in myself, I know that there's no real end to it, but I think that there is definitely an integration of how we relate to it. And I think that last one that you said, find meaning, right? Like I think that's really the integral piece of how we kind of make sense of it in our own nervous system, in our own communities.
Absolutely.
I heard recently somebody describe grief as like time is circular with grief, where like we circle back around to an anniversary or a holiday, or we circle back to a time of year where a wound once was. And so instead of thinking of grief as like a linear timeline, if we think of it as like a circular, well, no wonder when December comes around, or July, or whatever month where we have a loss or an anniversary of a loss, then that would make sense why it comes up again and again, right? At the same times of year.
Absolutely. One of the best, on that real quick, I have a great image. One of the best images I ever got from a therapist was that she was like, it's not only circular, but it's like you're summiting a mountain in a circle. And so, every once in a while you're going to come and face that same vision, right? Like, because you're coming around the mountain and you're going to hit that point, but you're not in the same, you're rising higher and higher. Right. So you're not on the same level every single time. And I think, again, that's really important, because instead of saying, oh my God, why am I here again? It's like, this is the shape of the mountain and you are walking up it. And so it's a spiral and you're spiraling up, but it doesn't always feel like that. I think that's a beautiful, I loved hearing that. That helped me a lot, just having that visual.
I love and that visual I learned early on in my loss, and that has definitely been transformative at how I relate to it, absolutely. Again, just for our listeners, if you're, just tuning in, I did want to just share some local resources. You can go to our website, first, FIRST, the number 5, Mendocino.org, and learn about some of our other programs. We have a lot of different programs on there that can kind of just help support a lot of anywhere you're at with your parenting journey, including these grief workshops. I do want to just call out, Megan and another one of our staff members are both trained in mindfulness, nature walks. Did you want to talk more about that, Megan, a little bit? I think that it's kind of important, talking. We introduced a couple of those when we had MC come and speak.
Yeah, I love the idea of using nature as a sort of a co-regulator of emotions, that we can go out into nature, that it's accessible to everybody, and you can go anytime. You can even go there in your imagination, and that having tools for how to connect with yourself on a deeper level, connect with whatever emotions you're going through, whether it's grief or something else, that nature can be a really regulating power, and that there's specific practices that we can guide people through to kind of more of an internal processing. We don't do it's not therapeutic,
no,
but more of just like an internal reflection, time to reflect and connect with nature, and in that process connect with yourself on a deeper level.
Yeah, and I think, for me, I think communing with nature and getting back into kind of like noticing the natural rhythms of nature around me really helped regulate myself through my grief, through the deepest acute grief process. I don't know, MC, if you have anything you want to share about that.
Oh my gosh, yeah, from personal experience, I think that's been one of the most helpful things in my life, because, you're getting outside, get out of your house, out of your head is the phrase I like to use. But then also being in nature and feeling like, you can express anything you need to and want to without judgment. The trees are not going to judge you. The earth is going to hold you. The earth is going to ground you underneath your feet. I think it's incredibly regulating and really special. Yeah.
And we have so much of it here in Mendocino County. I don't think we actually access it to the point that could be so nurturing to our nervous systems and to our mental health, And for those listeners, this show will be available on KZYX's website, www.kzyx.org. So you'll have 2 weeks to be able to kind of refer to it and listen to it. So please feel free to share this show with anybody you think that might benefit from some of the tools and tips that are being shared, or the conversation. There's also a Hospice of Ukiah Grief Recovery Group is located here locally. Their phone number is 707-462-4038. And Redwood Community Services also has a mental health crisis response service phone number that is bilingual, and their phone number is 855-838-0404. So if you are wanting to reach out and get support, we do have resources here that are available. And I think, going back to, as far as like that co-regulation piece and the need for community, I think being, the six needs of the griever, they were all, most of them seem to be done with another person, right? To have that community support, to have that ability to be able to sit and hold space with another person that is still here. I don't know if you guys want to just chime in about, anything about that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, Megan. Megan, you can go.
Well, I right away was just thinking, I actually this morning, kind of in preparation to get my thoughts going on this topic, MC, I referred back to a podcast episode with you and Thomas Hubel. I think the one from September or October, where you both talked about the importance of community and being seen and understood, and how powerful that is. I wish I could refer back to a specific thing you said, but yeah, I think there's so much power in in feeling like there's this felt sense of somebody else understanding, validating, and just sharing that sacred space of I understand you, and kind of connecting like that. Oh, there was that other podcast you recommended with Nick Cave. That we connect on our jagged edges, right? We all have loss of some kind, and we can share in that space together.
I think it's really important there, too, to also say that, like, it's not all dark, sad, heavy work. Because I think when we think about witnessing grief, we think, like, oh, I'm going to be plummeted into it. And for sure, when you're meeting someone in their grief, there is shared emotion. But there's also so much, because you're sharing it together, there's this inherent sense, like, immediately that neither one of you is alone in it. The listener isn't alone in it, and the griever isn't alone in it, because you're together, and you're also sharing an experience that literally every person goes through. And so there's that. But then I think, when we validate and sit with each other and say really simple things like, your pain makes sense, we see how regulating and grounding that can be in a moment of really overwhelming grief. And there's also a lot of, when you meet someone where they are and you're asking about their grief, what you're asking them to sort of explain and connect to is also the depth of the relationship that they had. And so just because someone has tears in their eyes doesn't mean the story that they're telling isn't joyful.
Totally.
100%. And so, I've had a lot of loss in my life, and when I tell stories about people who other people know that I've lost, right, like my parents, sometimes they get freaked out, like, are you going to get real deep and sad now? And most of the time it's a funny story and we're all laughing at the end, you know? Like,
right.
So it's kind of a myth of grief that it has to be this, like, when we connect in it, we all have to be, very serious and sad and down, and, that's just not how it is at all.
That totally strengthens the tool that you shared with us earlier with what remains, right? Journaling, what remains, right? And then also sitting and witnessing in community or with partnership or a friend or even your own children, like, just like also sitting with that and kind of unpacking what remains. And it's oftentimes joy and humor and hope, like they're all kind of embedded and woven in together.
When it deepens then the relationship with the person that you're connecting with, when you can when you can connect on that deeper level. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because at the beginning you mentioned the depth and beauty that can come with as we're plunged into grief, and I wanted to ask you then, like, what do you mean by that, or tell me more. So I'm glad that we came back around to that topic.
Well, and I just love to hear about any more tools, or how does joy kind of seep in through around grief?
I think joy is this is one of those things that we also I think define incorrectly to our own disservice, because we think joy is something that is only for us in good moments, and we can only look for it. Maybe we only deserve it when things are going well, and so. The neat thing about joy and hope is that they don't need you to believe in them for them to exist.
I love that saying.
What I've found in my own losses and deep grief is that joy does just show up. And sometimes when you don't want it to, right? Like, you're in this moment where you're kind of wrapping grief and maybe anger, bitterness kind of around you like a blanket. Joy will just pop through the window and say, like, hey, how's it going? In the form of a sunbeam or a friend texting you, or there are these tiny moments. And I think the thing that's important about recognizing that is that if we can see that, we can then amplify the effect that it has by leaning into it and kind of imprinting it. And so I always tell a story about how, at my father's funeral, I walked up the aisle and there was this hilariously large, life-size plastic camel on the altar, because my father died on Christmas. And so on the 28th, the church was still decorated for Christmas, right? So it was part of the nativity scene, which they had decided to do a little bit differently that year. Usually it had been this very tasteful, glass, thing, and this was this giant camel. And so I spent the first couple of minutes of my father's funeral laughing. Joy showed up, and I didn't want it there, but it was there, and I think it was merciful. And so when we can lean into that and recognize it, then we can amplify the impact that it has.
And I think just really understanding that, I love that story, and just really understanding that it's there regardless if, it's not, if you believe it or not, really helps to do that destigmatizing the grief.
Right. And I think knowing not to feel guilty about it, or not to feel ashamed that you're laughing in a moment when you feel like, if you feel like you should be just deep in sadness the entire time. I was telling Townley that on the way here that I had an experience in the middle of a grief loss that we were going through, where I watched an episode of The Office, and I was laughing hysterically, and there was like somatically in my body just this huge relief that I was able to set aside the heaviness for a little bit, but then immediately I just felt this intense grief, or like shame of like
guilt.
How dare you laugh at a time like this? And I wish then I'd understood, like, no, that was completely appropriate and actually healing, like a healing part of, and that it was okay and necessary even to be part of the process.
I feel really fortunate to
Absolutely.
I feel really fortunate to have had support during some of the darkest times of my life. And I don't think those who were supporting me understood what the gift they were giving to me of bringing joy and purpose, humor, and taking me away from kind of like the saddest parts, not really away, but just, kind of re-coordinating myself and say, look, this also remains, without even saying that, but just, taking me for a joyride down PCH, or, taking me out to a fun, movie or what have you, just having that community know that, you also deserve joy.
Yeah.
And you also deserve that humor.
And MC, from your book, The Joy Reset, I love what you say about how joy is not the light at the end of your grieving, but it's the light. It's the light that gets us through the darkest moments.
Yeah.
I really have loved that.
Yeah, and it's just, I think as we're all saying, it's true. And I think if we know that as people who are going to help grievers, right, that can also be really helpful, because again, not all of the help has to be this sort of like dark, sad, scary thing. Sometimes it is taking your friend for a joyride down the PCH, or sending them your favorite new guilty pleasure song so they can dance to it. Like, things like that can be incredibly grounding and helpful. I remember a friend came, when I lost my dad, I was in my 20s, and so all my friends were going through these 20s things, right? Like breakups and job things, and like, not necessarily the loss of their parent. And I had a friend come visit me, and she was going through this, like, and this is going to sound bad, but like I think we all know this kind of thing, this like incredibly juicy breakup, like full of gossip, like that you kind of are on the edge of your seat for. Right, exactly. And I remember her like apologizing, and she's like, I'm so sorry, I can't believe I'm talking to you about this. And I was like, please tell me more, like everything. This is such a beautiful distraction, because it's like just this other realm, So I think that's another thing that's really helpful, is that you don't feel like you have to hold your life back from a person who's grieving. You can ask them, you can check in. Does it feel okay to be talking about this right now? I know you just went through something really big, but then let them have their answer. And that answer might be, tell me every single, detail about this juicy gossip, because I'm sorry for what you're going through, but I love this,
Yeah, absolutely.
That kind
absolutely.
of thing.
And I think that, that you bring up a really good point, because sometimes, we either don't give ourselves permission to have a break from the grief, or we physically, feel like our biology, because it's that, what did you say, the passive grief, right? We don't have any sense of control over it. Are there any other tools that we can really be more active and kind of like curious about our grief that would allow someone who might be feeling like they're really stuck and being consumed by it could lean into?
Yes, so I think there's a ton of research about narrative work, and so that can be a conversation, but it could also be journaling. And this is something you can do completely for free. Free writing is a really great way to access the stuff that's kind of maybe fighting underneath the surface. These thoughts and emotions and feelings that are underneath. So one of the best grieving prompts that I like to use for free writing is, what I want you to know is this.
I love that.
this comes from the poet Buddy Wakefield, who's amazing. If you don't know him, look him up. But what I want you to know is this. So you just write that down on the piece of paper, and then you set a timer for like 4 minutes, 6 minutes, and you just let yourself free write. So that might be venting. That might be nonsense. You might write a swear word over and over for 4 minutes, whatever it is.
Right.
That gives you like a time-boxed moment to access your grief, access what's underneath your like current emotions, and it gives you end up sort of witnessing yourself in that way.
I love that.
And it's active. It gives you the sense of active grieving. Another really simple tool that I love, which I get from my friend Tracy, is to build an altar, like a little altar for the person that you've lost. To go through your house and gather some objects or maybe some photos or just anything that reminds you of the person that you've lost, and create a little corner somewhere in your house. It can be like, 4 inches. It doesn't have to be this big, thing where you can go, here's where I'm going to go when I'm really missing them. And that gives you, again, the sense of like place and agency, and again, puts you into the active grief. And then just to put one more on top of it, music is a really healing modality in a lot of different ways. And so creating a grief playlist or a little soundtrack for your grief can be a really beautiful way to sort of actively remember somebody, but then give yourself a regulating experience of music. So my mom loved like Motown music and lots of different things. And so having a playlist that represents all the music that she loves gives me a way to sort of actively travel through my memories of her, but then also create something that I can go like visit, right? I can put that on and I feel like I'm kind of visiting with her. So those are 3 like super simple, free tools that you can use at any time to kind of get into active grief.
I love those. And I know for myself, music is definitely my go-to when I'm needing a reset or a kind of a recharge. My staff can contest to how loud my car is when I pull to work. I like it loud. I just want to remind our listeners that we are, revisiting kind of the trauma-informed topic that First 5 Minutes is deeply invested in around grief, and just, maybe giving some tools on how to co-regulate and help others who might be going through it. Our guest today was Dr. MaryCatherine McDonald. I just really want to thank you. We're going to wind up a little bit here, but I just wanted to give you any last thoughts, or if you could please also share your new website. I know we have a new website that you kind of have, and maybe some of your books, and where we can find you, where listeners can find you on Instagram or anything like that. That'd be great for our listeners.
Sure, yeah. I am available on Instagram and TikTok at the same handle. It's just mc.phd. And my website is drmcmcdonald.com.
Great. And then could you just give us a little teaser on their tiny little joys that you've been doing on Instagram? Because I know our whole staff has been, following them and what have you.
Yes, so I had the, I don't know how I want to call it now because it's December. And January 1st, I had the impulse to get on Instagram and hold myself accountable to do a tiny little joy every single day, which just means that I get on and I make a little video about something in my day that has sparked just a little tiny bit of joy. And then everybody who is following and wants to pipes in with their own tiny little joy from the day. And we have done it every single day. Today, I think, is day 340 or something of the year. And so we've done it every single day this year, regardless of what has happened. And as you two know, and a lot of you folks in Mendocino who know, it's been a year. It's not been easy. There's been a lot of stuff going on. And it's been really great because it has enabled me to see that this actually does work, and also how grounding it is. Mm-hmm. You think okay, MC, you just wrote a book on this and it worked. Yes. But I hadn't I hadn't practiced it every single day before. Yeah. And it's been incredibly grounding and helpful. And also the community is really beautiful. This is a space on the internet where everybody comes in and pipes in one good thing every day. That's not usually how we use the internet these days.
Right.
So, it's been like it's been a breath of fresh air for me. And getting to read everybody else's tiny little joys is so grounding when you're having a tough day,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, and I wanted to point out, MC, just like we often talk about anticipatory grief when we are anticipating grief or loss. But this practice, I realized in talking to you, you named it anticipatory joy, where what I was feeling like,
love that.
Like today, I'm already thinking of what's my tiny little joy going to be today that's going to surprise me, or what's the thing tomorrow, and that's such a beautiful thing to like be going through life anticipating like what's the next thing that's going to shock me or awe me or bring me a little spark of joy. And just such a beautiful way to go through life, and it's an incredible practice that you've made this contagious space for joy, and it's been so beautiful to be a part of that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to thank our listeners. We've been listening to the First 5 Mendocino Community Hour. My name is Townley Saye. I've been here with Megan Carson and MC McDonald. You can find us here every third Tuesday of the month. Our next show will be January 20th at 9 o'clock. And you can find this recording available on KZYX's website, kzyx.org, for the next 2 weeks. Please feel free to share it with anybody who might be interested. And we're going to go out with just a few little segue of music. Stand by me. So thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next month. Until then, have a happy New Year, and thank you, MC.
Thanks so much, MC. We loved having you.
Thank you for having me. This was so lovely. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see, no, I won't be afraid. Oh, I won't be afraid, just as long as you stand by me. So darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Stand by me. If the sky that we look upon should tumble and fall, or the mountain should crumble the sea, I won't cry, no, I won't shed a tear, just as long as you stand by me. And darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand now. Stand by me. Stand by me.
You're tuned to KZYX 90.7 FM, Philo, KZYZ 91.5 FM, Willits and Ukiah, and 88.1 FM, Fort Bragg. Altogether, we make up Mendocino County Public Broadcasting, member-supported community radio. We also stream on the web at kzyx.org.
Support for KZYX comes from our members and Mama's Cafe at 210 South State Street in Ukiah. Open Tuesday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. to 2 p.m., Saturday and Sundays, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Mama's Cafe, bringing families and friends together since 2001.